1 week season.
Hello, friends and Inner Circle fam. We are back with another first look video diving into the Week 16 main slate. As always, I'm your host, StatATL. So every week I open up the DK app. I go game by game, position by position, noting my initial thoughts on each game. You can find those on Twitter, or you can find them pinned in the 1 week season Discord in the Inner Circle channel. But here we've got a 11 game slate here on week 16, and it starts off with the Browns at the Bengals. So the Bengals are technically still in the playoff hunt. And they've been on fire offensively the second half of the season, scoring 27 or more points in every game since week 8. But the Browns haven't, and the Browns haven't been an opposing defense this season, and have only held an opponent under 20 points twice. Week 2 against Jacksonville, and then the 19 snow game against the Steelers in week 12. So initially, this kind of stands out as a game to lean into the Cincinnati offense. So as Hilo would say, if searching for ceiling, look no further than Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. So Chase has 3 games this season with 44 or more DraftKings points. And in those games, Joe Burrow went for 428 yards and 4 touchdowns, 392 yards and 5 touchdowns, and 369 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I think that if you want to attack this game from the Bengals side, that would be what stands out to me here on first look. The other side of the ball is reasonably straightforward as well. Jerry Jeudy, probably the most obvious pairing. He's seen 50 targets in the past 5 games since the Browns bye, averaging 127 receiving yards per game during that stretch. It was just announced today that Dorian Thompson-Robinson will be starting this week. Might temper my expectations for both Jerry Jeudy and this game in general. I'm not sure the Bengals are going to be able to push the Browns as much. I guess kind of final piece from this game, the Browns backfield kind of intriguing. Nick Chubb out for the year with a broken foot, leaving Jerome Ford to have control of the running game once again. He's just 5,600. So I think that's an interesting spot to potentially consider this week. Moving on to the next game, we've got the Giants at the Falcons, a 42-point total. We've targeted running backs against the Giants all season. I don't think that should stop this week. The Falcons have their backs against the wall in the playoff hunt, and their quarterback play has struggled so much with Kirk Cousins having just 1 touchdown to go along with 9 interceptions the past 5 weeks, that just announced today that they are moving away from Cousins to Michael Penix, the number 8 pick. So I do expect that Atlanta is going to lean on Bijan Robinson once again, with their rookie quarterback making his first NFL start. Bijan Robinson seen 20 or more touches in 7 out of the last 8 games. He's now facing a Giants defense that's allowed 5 running backs to top 130 total yards. So I do really like this spot for Bijan. And then on the other side of the ball, I think the matchup for Malik Neighbors is really intriguing at 6,100. Falcons have allowed several monster games to wide receivers this season, and Neighbors is the cheapest he's been since week 2. And he's averaging just shy of 12 targets a game this season. So I think at 6,100, he presents an interesting value play. I think very likely to kind of see that 15 to 20 point game from him. Obviously has upside for more. Next game we've got on the slate is the Cardinals at the Panthers. We've kind of been attacking Carolina with opposing running backs all season. And James Conner is coming off back-to-back games with 120 total yards. And 3 straight games with 20 or more touches. So I think the Panthers have allowed an opposing running back to rush for over 100 yards in 4 out of the past 5 games, which includes, Bucky Irving and Rico Dowdle both posting their career best games in that 5-game stretch. So Connor's expensive at 7,100, but Cardinals playoff lives kind of hang in the balance. I would expect another heavy workload for the Cardinals running back. And, he's got a little less competition in the back in that backfield with Trey Benson dealing with an ankle injury, missed practice on Wednesday. And he's, they've also got DeMarcado, their pass catching back, they put on IR this past week. So he doesn't have a lot of competition for targets. I think it's very likely we see 20 to 25 touches for James Conner in a very strong matchup. So I really do like him. Other side of the ball, Chuba Hubbard, it's a strong spot but for only 300 more, I think I'd probably initially prefer Conner. Through the air here, I think the matchup sets up pretty well for Trey McBride. He's seen double-digit targets in every Cardinals game since their Week 11 bye. Hasn't scored a touchdown yet this season. Still averaging close to 16 fantasy points a game. But Arizona's been scheming him looks by the goal line, and Carolina's allowed 8 touchdowns to tight ends in the past 8 weeks. So I think this is a real strong spot where McBride likely gets into the end zone for the first time this season. Next game on the slate is the Lions at the Bears. Past 5 weeks, Bears have surrendered games of 129 yards to Aaron Jones, 134 yards to Josh Jacobs, 128 yards to Isaiah Guerrero, 106 yards to Aaron Jones just on Monday night, and then 228 yards to the combination of Montgomery and Gibbs when these teams squared off back in Week 13. So in that game, Gibbs went for 104 yards on just 11 touches. And with David Montgomery now out for the year, this stands out as like a spot where I'd expect Gibbs to kind of see more in that 18 to 20 touch range, probably handle 75% of the backfield work in a really great matchup. So even at 7,500, I think that he really stands out in a game that Detroit needs to win to, retain control of their own destiny for the number 1 seed. The matchup through the air isn't as bad as it appears for Detroit, as 7 different wide receivers have gone for 20 or more DraftKings points against the Bears this season. However, I think it's much more appealing on the other side of the ball. A Bears pass catcher has put up 18 or more DK points 11 times this season. So this feels like a spot where one of more Allen or Odunze is going to give you a tournament viable score. All 3 of them are priced between 5,100 and 5,700. And the only defense that Detroit stymied all year was Jacksonville, where Brian Thomas, he went for 5 for 82. That was the worst, like the best score out of every team's pass catcher. That was the worst, best score. So I think this is a week where obviously it's really early in the week, but this might be one where I make a rule of like one of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, or Rome Odunze on every lineup, because it feels very likely that one of them is going to give you an 18 to 20 point score in this game. So I do really like that spot. I think if we get some news around Craig Reynolds or the rookie Sion Vaki, if we get news that one of them is going to be handling 30-40% of the backfield work for Detroit, I think they could become intriguing, kind of at the absolute stone minimum. So I think that would be a spot that I would consider there. So the next game here is the Patriots at the Bills. Only matchup that stands out for the Patriots is the ground game. However, Antonio Gibson continues to remain involved, and neither he nor Ramondre Stevenson has topped 13 fantasy points since Week 9. So not really a spot that I'm gravitating to. On the other side of the ball, the matchup really stands out for James Cook, as the Patriots have given up games of 100 plus total yards and a touchdown to Connor and JT, Bigsby, Mixon, and Jordan Mason already this year. James Cook is likely going to have to get there on efficiency, though, at 7,000, as he hasn't topped 15 touches since week 10. So I think on paper, the matchup is pretty middling here for Josh Allen. However, he's coming off the stretch of like the two best games in fantasy history for any player at any position, with 99.2 DK points scored during that span. So basically averaging 50 points a week. And I think the Bills still have a pretty reasonable shot at the number 1 seed, especially if Mahomes were to miss some time. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Allen and Buffalo kind of keep the pedal down on this one and potentially even throttle New England here. So the next game on the slate is the Titans at the Colts. So the backfields for both teams are intriguing here, as both Jonathan Taylor and Tony Pollard continue to dominate their workloads. JT probably slightly more interesting, as he's seen 23 or more touches in 4 out of the past 5 games. And the Titans have allowed games of 113-2 to Chase Brown and 109-1 to Bijan Robinson in 2 out of the past 3 weeks. So I certainly think a 100-yard rushing game with 2 touchdowns is certainly within the range of outcomes for Jonathan Taylor. However, I think the piece that kind of stands out to me the most as kind of the most intriguing is Anthony Richardson here. The Titans have allowed strong rushing games to every mobile quarterback they faced, giving up lines like 73 yards and a touchdown to Malik Willis, 40 yards and a touchdown to Tyler Huntley, 32 yards and a touchdown to Justin Herbert, 34 yards and a touchdown to Jaden Daniels, and they even gave up 95 yards rushing to Drake May. So in the 10 games this season where Richardson has seen action, he's averaging 43 yards and half a touchdown on 8 attempts per game on average. So he's provided like multiple 5x salary fantasy scores already this season. And in a game where Indy needs to win to kind of keep their playoff hopes alive, I think this is an interesting spot to take some chances on Anthony Richardson. I think that you could pair him with JT, but I'll also have some interest in Josh Downs or AD Mitchell if Alec Pierce is out as well. So next game here on the slate is the Rams versus the Jets. Devontae Adams kind of stands out here initially, as the Rams have allowed monster games to opposing wide receivers, specifically the possession wide receivers. 180 yards and 2 touchdowns to Jackson Smith-Njigba, 175 yards and 3 touchdowns to Juwan Jennings, 130 yards and 2 touchdowns to Marvin Harrison. Then they've also given up, strong games to just strong wide receivers in general, 121 to Jameson Williams, 109 to AJ Brown, 115 to Justin Jefferson, and, 106 and a touchdown to Khalil Shakir, just last week. So, Devontae Adams has seen 11 or more targets in 3 straight games and 5 out of the last 6 with the Jets. So he's, really continued to develop that chemistry that he's had with Aaron Rodgers dating back to the days in Green Bay. And I think Rodgers is also intriguing at 5,600. He's coming off the 2 best games of his of the year for him. And the Rams have given up 300 or more total yards to, Kyler Murray and Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Josh Allen, and Drake May. So I think there's definitely some upside for Rodgers here. Difficult for the Rams wide receivers. However, the Jets just haven't played that many teams with strong wide receivers, and they've given up games of 10 for 115 and a touchdown to Tyreek Hill, 10 for 105 and 2 touchdowns to Brian Thomas, 9 for 99 to Jalen Waddle in just the past 2 games. So, you've got Tank Dell went 6 for 126, and George Pickens, 5 for 111. I think Justin Jefferson went 6 for 90 something. So they've also had solid games against the Jets. And you look at Puka Nacua here averaging, 11 targets a game the past 6 weeks. I think he's also interesting, certainly if you want to build around Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers in a mini stack. The next game on the slate here is the Eagles at the Commanders. And a double stack of Jalen Hurts with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith quietly went for 90 fantasy points last week. And while Washington does present a difficult matchup, I mean, so did last week's opponent in the Steelers. I think on paper, the Commanders appear kind of stout against opposing quarterbacks. But I think if you do a deeper dive into it, kind of reveals the fact that it might be a bit of a facade. Yes, they've held Will Levis and Jake Hayner and Cooper Rush and Andy Dalton and, Russell Wilson and Caleb Williams and Deshaun Watson and Daniel Jones twice to under 250 yards. They've also allowed games of, 310 and 4 touchdowns to Baker Mayfield, 363 and a touchdown to Lamar Jackson, 328 and 3 touchdowns to Joe Burrow. So I certainly think that there is some ceiling opportunity here for Hurts. And, the matchup doesn't stand out for Saquon Barkley either. However, he did go for 198 total yards and 2 touchdowns when these teams met back in week 11. So I don't think this game's going to stand out to the field, but I think it certainly has some sneaky upside for Hurts, Barkley, Brown, and Devonta Smith. Eagles defense on the other side has been a difficult matchup basically across the board. So I don't know that there's any play from Washington that kind of stands out to me here. Next game on the slate here is the Vikings at the Seahawks. Like the Eagles at Commanders, the last game we just talked about, this is another one with really strong playoff implications. Through the air, Seattle's allowed 16 or more fantasy points to Romeo Doubs, Devontae Adams, Juwan Jennings, Demarcus Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Drake London, Deebo Samuel, Darius Slayton, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Trey McBride, Hunter Henry, George Kittle. Like a long list of pass catchers have had success against the Seahawks. So this is a spot for Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson. I think they're all interesting to me this week. I think I would have more interest in Jackson Smith and the Jigba on the other side of the ball if we had a little bit more news around Geno Smith's health. JSN's coming off a 12-target game. I think it's his third game with 11 or more targets the past 6 weeks. And, wide receivers have had their way with Minnesota with 13 different wide receivers accounting for at least 80 yards. So I think that's a spot to consider. On the ground for the Vikings, it does set up well here, the matchup for Aaron Jones. But, he only has one game all year over 24 fantasy points. And he continues to see Cam Akers eat into his workload. So not a spot I'm particularly drawn to. Next game, we've got the Jaguars at the Raiders. This is probably the worst real-life NFL game on the slate, and not one that initially looks to have a whole lot of fantasy goodness either. We've got some uncertainty here about who's going to be under center for Las Vegas, with Desmond Ridder filling in last week as Adrian O'Connell sat out with a knee injury. I would say any interest I have in Brock Bowers would be tempered if AOC is once again inactive. I think that Jacoby Myers is likely going to stand out to most of the field in this matchup, but he only has one game of over 23 fantasy points, which would be kind of that 4x salary score, and it was only 25.1. So I think he's kind of more of a floor play than a ceiling play. So I think in large field tournaments, like he's probably a spot I'm going to avoid, especially if it's Desmond Ridder, and especially if he's garnering some medium to high ownership. On the other side of the ball, the ground game's kind of in a really strong spot for the Jags. However, they've been kind of splitting their backfield pretty evenly between Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne, kind of making it hard to get excited about it. So I guess kind of here on first pass, probably a game I'm going to be likely to avoid altogether. And then the last game we've got here on the main slate is the 49ers at the Dolphins. Two teams that are likely out of the playoff picture for 2024, but still a game with some potential fantasy goodness. I would say the ground matchup doesn't really stand out for either back. Garendo's been a little bit more, he's been involved, reasonably productive, but his price is all the way up to 6,700. And the Dolphins haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher all season. I would say the 49ers have been a little bit more of a friendly matchup to running backs as the season's progressed. Kyron Williams, James Cook, and Josh Jacobs all rushed for over 100 yards in just the last 4 weeks. So I think this is an intriguing spot for Devon Achane. We've seen his price drop down to 7,400, and he's got, really strong continued involvement in the pass game. He's got 23 targets his last 3 games, so basically averaging 8 targets a game. And so at 7,400, I think that catches my eye here on first pass is intriguing. Through the air, Niners generally been pretty tough matchup against, for wide receivers. They've given up some stronger games to elite wide receivers. Justin Jefferson went for 133 and a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb went for 146 and 2 touchdowns. JSN went for 110. So I think there's definitely ceiling there for Tyreek Hill. And I think that he's likely to be operating without Jalen Waddle this week. So I think that that's intriguing. I don't know how much of the field is going to be excited to play Tyreek against the 49ers defense. But I think there's certainly some upside there. And then on the other side of the ball, matchup doesn't really stand out. The matchup does stand out for George Kittle. Multiple tight ends have had really strong games against Miami the past few weeks. You look at Trey McBride, went 9 for 124. Brock Bowers went 13 for 126 and a touchdown. And Tucker Kraft went 6 for 78. So at 6K, I think Kittle's of initial interest. And then if we are looking at the defenses that kind of are standing out to me here on first pass, I would say we've got Atlanta, Minnesota, Cincinnati, and then, both sides of the ball in that Indy and Tennessee game. I think both of those defenses are intriguing. I would say that does it for me here on the first look. Look forward to seeing everyone around the site and in Discord this week. And as always, I hope to see you and your OWS avatar at the top of the leaderboard here in week 16. Thanks for tuning in.